As night settles over the frozen land outside, the world grows quieter and more contained. The last light of day fades. The door is closed. Inside, nothing dramatic happens. Life simply slows, as it has on countless winter nights before. This is a quiet story, not of heroism or struggle, but of ordinary people resting together through a harsh season, of shared warmth, familiar routines, and the calm assurance that the night will pass. Tonight, we will gently spend a long winter night inside, listening to soft sounds and letting the rhythm unfold at an easy pace. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching since today? Simply allow the day to loosen its hold and let the night settle naturally around you. Then, at your own pace, allow the story to drift onward and carry you gently towards sleep. The far north of Alaska had already lost the sun for the day. A low grey light lay over the tundra like ash, and the wind moved across the open land without pause, dragging long veils of snow behind it. The settlement of Ravens Point, no more than a scatter of low wooden buildings and a single weather-beaten store, hunched against the cold as if trying to disappear. Nathan Cole stepped down from the small freight sled with the awkward care of someone who wasn't used to standing on ice. He was in his early 30s, of average height, with a lean build that came more from desk work and long walks through city streets than from any hard labor. His dark hair, usually neatly combed, was now flattened beneath a wool cap that didn't quite cover his ears. His face was narrow, his jaw clean-shaven, his brown eyes alert and curious, but with the restless energy of a man who believed he could adapt to almost anything if he just tried hard enough. Nathan had grown up far to the south, in a cramped boarding house above a noisy street, the child of a mother who took in laundry and a father who drank more than he spoke. From an early age, he had learned that the only way to move forward was to tough it out, to endure discomfort and pretend it didn't bother him. That lesson had turned into a quiet, stubborn pride. To him, hardship was just another test to pass. Alaska, in his mind, was only the next examination. He stamped his boots, sturdy but not nearly as insulated as they should have been, and drew his wool coat tighter. The bite of the air surprised him, but he refused to show it. This, he told himself, was just cold. He had been cold before. Chicago in January had cut through his clothes like knives. This couldn't be that different. A few months up here, he thought, and he would go home with good money and better stories. Waiting for him beside the sled was Elias Turner. Elias was a man built by winters. In his late 40s, perhaps early 50s, he stood slightly taller than Nathan, with broad shoulders that filled out his heavy parka. His beard, once dark, was now streaked with grey and pressed flat with frost along the edges. His skin was weathered to a permanent wind-burned tan, lined deeply around the eyes and mouth. Those eyes were a pale, steady blue, the kind that had watched storms roll in over frozen rivers and never looked away. Elias spoke little, and when he did, his voice had the rough texture of a man who preferred to save his breath for things that mattered. People who knew him described him as calm, practical, and slow to judge. but also slow to forgive carelessness that put others at risk. Years earlier, a winter expedition had gone wrong because someone had ignored his warning about thin ice. 2 men had fallen through. 1 had not come back. Since then, Elias had treated other people's confidence with cautious suspicion. At his side sat a dog, harness lines still attached to the sled. The animal was large and thick-furred, with a coat of mottled grey and white that blended with the snow. One ear was notched at the tip, and an old scar ran along his left flank, half hidden by winter fur. His eyes were a clear amber, sharp and watchful, following every movement. His name was Bear, though he was no more than 8 years old. Still strong, still capable of pulling heavy loads across long distances without complaint. Bear was not friendly in the way city dogs sometimes were. He did not wag his tail at strangers or seek hands to pat his head. He watched, assessed, and accepted or ignored, much like his owner. "You're Cole?" Elias asked, his breath streaming pale in the frigid air. Nathan straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. Nathan Cole. From Seattle. They said you'd be the one to meet me." Elias gave a single nod. His gaze shifted briefly over Nathan's clothing. The wool coat, the gloves that were warm enough for a city winter, but thin for this place, the boots that lacked the thick fur trim and extra insulation of local footwear. He registered each detail without visible expression. "Travel light," Nathan added, trying to sound cheerful. "Figure it's only a few months. I can handle it." Elias said. It was neither agreement nor disagreement. Just a small sound acknowledging that words had been spoken. He turned to the sled, checking the lashings, testing the tension of each rope, with gloved fingers, hardened by cold and work. "We leave now. It'll be dark soon." Nathan glanced up at the sky, surprised. Already? The storekeeper, a wiry man with a narrow face and a permanent squint, stepped out onto the creaking porch behind them. He was a background figure in this story, but even he carried the mark of the place. Shoulders rounded against wind, hands wrapped in thick mittens, voice quiet from years of speaking only when necessary. "Dark comes early here," the storekeeper said, "and it stays longer than you think." Nathan smiled thinly, unsure if that was supposed to be a joke. "I've done long nights before." The storekeeper said nothing. Elias finished his inspection and jerked his chin toward the sled. "Get on, we've got some distance to cover." Nathan climbed onto the back of the sled, gripping the wooden frame. Bear rose at a soft command, muscles bunching beneath his thick coat, and the team of dogs leaned into their harnesses. The runners scraped against ice, then slid forward. The settlement of Raven's Point began to fall behind them, its few oil lamps flickering in the growing grey. The wind met them as soon as they left the shelter of the buildings. It wasn't the sharp, cutting gust Nathan remembered from city streets, funneled between tall brick walls. This wind was wide and patient, flowing across the open tundra with a constant pressure that felt less like movement and more like the weight of something immense. Snow hissed along the ground in fine, dry streams, stinging his cheeks, working its way into the small gaps at his collar. He hunched instinctively pulling his cap lower. The cold found him anyway, settling into his fingers, creeping up from his feet. It wasn't dramatic. It simply persisted, a steady presence that would not let him forget itself. "This is something," Nathan shouted over the wind, forcing a laugh. His voice sounded thin in the open air, colder than I expected. Elias, standing at the front of the sled, did not turn. "This is mild," he called back. "Wind's light. You'll see real cold when it clears." Nathan's pride resisted the shiver that ran through him. "I'll get used to it," he said. "Give me a week. I'll be like a local." Bear's ears flicked at the sound of Nathan's voice, but the dog did not look back. He lowered his head against the wind and kept running, paws drumming a steady rhythm on the snow-packed ground. The land around them stretched flat and white, broken only by low ridges and distant dark lines of scrub and stunted trees. The horizon blurred where sky met earth, a seamless band of grey. No birds called, no water ran. The only sounds were the steady slide of the sled, the panting of the dogs, and the low, ceaseless murmur of the wind. Nathan tried to imagine this landscape under summer light, but it was difficult. Everything here seemed designed for winter, shaped around it. He tucked his chin into his scarf and thought of warm rooms and thick blankets, of the way he would someday tell this story in a crowded tavern, far from here. How he had gone north, how he had endured. He kept returning to that word, endure. Elias, up front, was not thinking of taverns or stories. He watched the sky, the fine changes in the wind's direction, the way the snow drifted and collected in low places. He had travelled this route so many times that he could almost feel the land's contours through the sled's runners. In his mind, winter was not an obstacle to be overcome, or a story to be told later. It was a condition of existence, as unyielding as gravity. Why build a place out here at all? Nathan called after a while, raising his voice to reach Elias. Why not stay in town for the winter? Elias considered whether to answer. He preferred silence. But silence did not teach, and if this man was going to share their shelter, he needed to understand at least a little. "Town's not built for weather that's coming," Elias said finally. "Thin walls, too many drafts, too much distance between one stove and the next. Out here we build into the ground. Thicker, warmer, safer. So it's like a cabin," Nathan asked. "Not like any cabin you've seen," Elias replied. "Cabins stand up and wait for the wind to knock them down. The house we're going to lies low and lets the wind pass over it." Nathan tried to picture that and failed. A house that lay low. A house dug into the earth. In his world, houses rose up. Rows of brick facades, bright windows, narrow alleys. This idea of a building that hid instead of standing tall felt wrong, almost cowardly. "It's only a few months," he said again, mostly to himself. "I can put up with anything for a few months." The temperature dropped as the last of the light drained from the sky. The grey turned darker, sliding toward blue, then toward something deeper. Nathan's eyelashes began to collect fine crystals of frost. Each breath burned a little on the way in and left his chest aching on the way out. He flexed his fingers inside his gloves trying to keep blood moving. He had underestimated the distance. The trading post had looked close on the map he had studied in his boarding room, a simple line between 2 points. But the land did not care about lines on paper. It stretched and folded and rose and fell, and the sled had to follow. After what felt like hours, Nathan saw a shape ahead that was not a drift or a scrub of dark brush. It was low and rounded, almost a natural hump in the snow. Only the faintest line of smoke rising from a small dark opening at the top suggested anything human. "That's it?" Nathan asked, voice hoarse from cold and shouting. "That's it," Elias said. "Home for the winter." As they drew closer, details emerged. The sides of the mound were packed snow and turf, cut and stacked with deliberate care. The entrance was not a broad door, but a low tunnel-like opening, half buried in the drift, just high enough for a person to crawl through. Smoke from the hidden hearth leaked out of a vent and was immediately torn sideways by the wind. Nathan stared, his expectations collapsing one by one. There were no tall walls, no chimneys, no visible windows. From a distance, he realized, you could pass within 100 yards and never know it was there. "It looks..." He searched for a word that wouldn't sound insulting. "Small. Small is good," Elias said. "Small keeps heat. Small keeps you alive." The sled slowed to a stop. Elias moved to unharness the dogs with efficient motions, murmuring brief words to Bear and the others. Nathan stepped down, legs stiff, feeling the ground sway under him as if he were still moving. The wind pressed against his back, reminding him it was there, that it always would be. He looked from the endless, darkening expanse of snow to the low, hidden entrance of the earth house. In his mind, winter had been a challenge, something to withstand and then boast about. Standing there, with the last light dying and the cold beginning to bite through every layer he wore, he felt a small, unfamiliar doubt stir at the edge of his thoughts. He pushed it away. "It's only a few months," he told himself again, and followed Elias toward the low, dark opening in the snow. The entrance was lower than Nathan expected. Elias dropped to one knee without hesitation and disappeared into the narrow passage, Bear following close behind, his thick body compressing easily, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Nathan paused, the wind pressing at his back, and then crouched awkwardly, ducking his head and shoulders into the darkness. The cold followed him for a few steps, then faded as the tunnel bent inward and down. By the time he straightened again, the sound of the wind had softened, as though someone had turned it down rather than shut it off. Inside, the air was dim and heavy with warmth. Not hot, not even comfortable by city standards, but undeniably warmer than outside. The space opened into a long, low hall, carved partly into the earth, its walls packed thick with turf and snow-darkened soil. The ceiling curved gently overhead, beams darkened by years of smoke running lengthwise, supported by sturdy posts sunk deep into the ground. The light came from a line of glowing embers, set in a shallow stone hearth that stretched along the center of the room, casting a low amber glow that barely reached the walls. Several people looked up as Nathan entered. Closest to the hearth sat a boy of about 14, his knees drawn up beneath a wool blanket. This was Samuel Turner, Elias's son. He was tall for his age, but still carried the slight, unfinished look of adolescence. Long limbs, narrow shoulders that would broaden in time. His hair was light brown and cut short for practicality. His face already touched by the weather in the form of chapped cheeks and a nose permanently pink from the cold. His eyes, a darker blue than his father's, were watchful and thoughtful. Samuel had grown up here, but only recently had he begun to understand that surviving winter was not something children were shielded from. It was something they were trained for. Samuel watched Nathan with open curiosity, not unfriendly, but cautious. He had been raised to observe before speaking, a habit born from listening to adults discuss storms, supplies, and decisions that carried real consequences. Earlier that day, he had helped Elias pack down loose snow against the outer walls, his fingers numb despite thick gloves. For the first time, he had wondered, not asked, but wondered, what would happen if they didn't? Across the hall, arranging thick wool blankets along one of the raised sleeping platforms, stood a woman in her early 40s. Her name was Sarah Whitaker. She was tall and lean, her posture straight despite the long hours of work that had shaped her body. Her dark hair was streaked with grey and pulled back into a tight braid that fell between her shoulders. Her face was narrow and angular, with sharp cheekbones and steady eyes that missed little. Sarah had come north years earlier with her husband, chasing work and promise. He had not survived his second winter. Since then, she had become something like the spine of the household. Quiet, efficient, and deeply practical. She did not speak often, but when she did, people listened. Sarah gave Nathan a brief nod, then returned to her task. The blankets she handled were heavy and worn, layered carefully to trap warmth rather than to provide softness. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Near the far end of the hall, seated on a low stool and rubbing his hands near the embers, was an older man named Thomas Reed. He was thin, almost wiry, with a stooped back and a beard that had gone entirely white. His movements were slow but deliberate, the economy of someone who knew exactly how much energy he could afford to spend. Thomas had been a carpenter once, before the cold stiffened his joints. Now he repaired tools, told stories when asked, and watched over the fire when others slept. He smiled at Nathan, a small, gentle expression that carried neither judgment nor welcome, just acknowledgement. Nathan took it all in. The low ceiling, the packed earth floor, the bodies arranged not around furniture, but around warmth. The place felt less like a house, and more like a single organism, each person a part of it. It unsettled him. "This is everyone?" he asked quietly. "For the night," Elias said, shrugging off his outer layer and hanging it near the entrance where the air was colder. "More come in storms. Fewer when the weather breaks." Samuel shifted, making room on the bench beside him without being told. Nathan hesitated, then sat. The wood beneath him was warm to the touch, not from the fire directly, but from the bodies that had rested there before. He felt it through his clothes and frowned. confused by the sensation. "How does it stay this warm?" he asked. "The fire's barely burning." "That's the point," Sarah said, not looking up. Her voice was calm, edged with something firm. "You don't fight the cold, you keep it from getting in." Elias nodded. "Fire helps, but the ground helps more. Earth doesn't change temperature fast. You build into it. It works for you." Samuel glanced at his father, then at the walls. "When we dug it deeper last summer," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I thought it was just more work. But now, when the wind's out there and it's quiet in here, I get it." Elias looked at his son, surprise flickering briefly across his face before settling into something like approval. He said nothing, but the moment passed between them like an understanding quietly sealed. Nathan rubbed his hands together, the warmth creeping slowly back into his fingers. "So this place," he said, "it's not really for living. It's just for getting through the night." "For getting through winter," Thomas corrected gently. "Nights are just where it starts." A small animal darted across the floor near the wall, then stopped beneath one of the platforms. It was a cat, small and lean, with black and white fur and one clouded eye that gave her a permanently lopsided look. Her name was Moth, and she was no more than 3 years old. She'd been taken in as a kitten after freezing temperatures killed her litter. Moth kept to herself, hunting mice that might otherwise chew through stored supplies. She curled up now, tail tucked tight around her body, close enough to the warmth to benefit, but far enough to remain independent. Nathan watched her disappear into shadow. Even the cat knows where to sit. Sarah allowed herself a faint smile. She learned faster than some people. The air grew heavier as the door was sealed behind Elias. The last hint of outside cold cut off. The embers hissed softly, releasing heat that rose and settled into the packed walls. Nathan felt the strange sensation of the house holding warmth rather than producing it, like a memory, slowly giving itself back. Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When I was younger," he said, almost to himself, "I thought houses were supposed to be tall, with windows, but those lose heat. This one keeps it, even when the fire's low." Nathan glanced at him. "Doesn't it feel closed in?" "Only at first," Samuel replied. "Then you stop noticing, and when you go outside again, that's when it feels wrong." Nathan didn't answer. He listened instead to the low murmur of voices, the faint crackle of embers, the soft movement of bodies settling in. The wind was still there, he knew. It hadn't gone anywhere. But it couldn't reach him now. He thought of the place he'd rented in Seattle, drafty despite its thick walls, the way cold seeped in through window frames, no matter how high he turned the heater. He had always assumed that was just how winter worked. Elias stood near the hearth, checking the embers, adjusting them with a practiced hand. "We sleep early," he said. "Heat holds better when bodies are still." Nathan nodded, though sleep felt far away. He was beginning to understand that this place wasn't built for comfort, or even for living as he understood it. It was built for one simple purpose: to make sure that when eyes closed at night, they opened again in the morning. He leaned back against the wall, feeling the packed earth steady behind him. Outside, winter continued its work, indifferent and relentless. Inside, the house answered with quiet resistance. The storm arrived without ceremony. There was no sudden crash of thunder or dramatic shift in the sky, only a slow tightening of pressure that made the air inside the earth house feel heavier. Elias noticed it first, pausing as he adjusted the embers, his head tilting slightly, as if listening to something beyond sound. Outside, the wind had changed direction. It no longer skimmed across the land. It pressed down. Nathan felt it a few minutes later. Though he could not have explained how, the packed walls seemed to hum faintly, not with noise, but with presence, as if the weather itself had leaned in close. He sat upright on the wooden platform, blanket pulled around his shoulders, suddenly aware of how completely the house enclosed them. The entrance tunnel had been sealed with a thick hide curtain and a fitted wooden panel, angled downward so that drifting snow would pile harmlessly against it instead of forcing its way inside. Sarah moved quietly across the floor, checking the seal, pressing her palm against the edge to feel for air leaks. She had learned to trust her hands more than her eyes. Years ago, during her first winter here, she had dismissed a thin draft as nothing worth worrying about. That night, the temperature had dropped hard. By morning, frost had crept halfway across the floor. Her husband had been the one to wake first, coughing, his breath ragged. He survived that winter, but not the next. Since then, Sarah had never ignored what the house was trying to tell her. "It's turning," she said softly. Elias nodded. "It'll blow hard by midnight." Nathan swallowed. "Should we do something?" "We already did," Elias replied. "Last summer, last fall, every day before tonight." Nathan frowned at that. He listened harder, expecting to hear the wind battering the walls. But it didn't. There was no roar, no pounding. Instead, the sound slid over the roof in long, low waves, like water flowing around a stone. Samuel sat cross-legged near the hearth, or a small notebook open on his knee. He had started keeping it recently, scratching down observations in a careful, uneven hand. Not stories. Facts. Wind direction. Snow depth. How the fire behaved on different nights. He glanced up at Nathan, then back at the curved ceiling overhead. "When I was little," Samuel said, "I thought houses were supposed to stand up straight, like people. Like if you built them tall enough, they could push back." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's how it is where I'm from." Samuel gestured upward. "This one doesn't push. It lets the wind pass over. Doesn't give it anything to grab." Nathan leaned back, eyes tracing the arc of the ceiling. From inside, the shape was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but now that Samuel had said it, he could imagine the roof buried beneath snow, its rounded form offering no edge, no corner for the storm to tear at. Thomas Reed cleared his throat near the fire. "Wind likes corners," he said. "It worries them, picks at them until something gives." Nathan thought of the house he had left behind in Seattle, a narrow wooden place on a sloping street, 2 stories tall, with sharp eaves and a porch that rattled every time the weather turned. He remembered one winter night in particular, years ago now. The storm had come fast, rain turning to sleet, sleet to snow. The wind had screamed down the street, finding every loose board, every poorly sealed seam. He had lain awake, listening to it, convinced something would tear free. In the morning, the porch roof had collapsed under the weight of ice and wind. Splintered beams scattered like broken ribs. That place fought the weather, he said quietly. And lost. Sarah glanced at him, surprised by the admission. She said nothing, but her expression softened slightly. The house shifted almost imperceptibly as the storm intensified. Not a movement of collapse, but of settling, like an animal lowering itself more firmly into the ground. Snow began to build against the outer walls, packing itself into every depression. Instead of threatening the structure, it became part of it, adding another layer of insulation, another barrier against the cold. Moth emerged briefly from beneath the platform, stretched, and then relocated closer to the hearth, curling herself into a tighter circle. She had learned where to sit on nights like this, where the air stayed stillest. Bear lay near the entrance, his massive body blocking what little cold seeped through the tunnel. His chest rose and fell slowly, breath steady. He did not lift his head when the wind howled above them. To him, this was simply the world doing what it always did. Nathan felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration. He had always believed survival was about endurance, about standing firm and taking what came. But here, survival looked like something else entirely. It looked like humility, like knowing when not to stand. "How did you figure this out?" he asked Elias. "The shape, the depth, all of it." Elias shrugged. "Didn't figure it out. Learned it. People before us learned it. People who didn't build this way, didn't stay long enough to teach anything." Samuel closed his notebook. "The old stories say the land teaches you," he added, "but only if you listen." The wind rose higher, sweeping across the tundra, with enough force to flatten shrubs and scour the snow down to hard ice. From inside the house, it sounded distant, muffled, as though the storm were happening somewhere else entirely. The embers glowed steadily, fed just enough to hold their heat without flaring. Nathan pulled his blanket tighter, feeling warmth seep into his back from the wall itself. The earth was doing exactly what Elias had said it would, giving back what it had taken in. He thought again of his old house, of how exposed it had felt, how every gust announced itself loudly. That place had been built to be seen, to stand out, to claim space. This one did the opposite. It disappeared. "I used to think hiding was weakness," Nathan said, more to the room than to anyone in particular. Sarah answered without looking up. "Hiding is choosing what matters." The storm reached its peak sometime after that. Snow piled high over the roof, sealing the house more completely into the land. The wind screamed, but it found nothing to tear at. No sharp edges, no tall walls. The house lay low and waited. Inside, conversation dwindled, one by one, People settled into their places along the platforms, bodies aligned close enough to share warmth without crowding. Nathan lay back, staring at the dark curve of the ceiling, listening to the muted world beyond the walls. For the first time since his arrival, he did not think about how long he would stay. He did not measure the winter in weeks or months. He thought only about the night ahead, about the simple fact that this place had been built to ensure that when morning came, if morning came, there would be people here to see it. Outside, the storm spent itself against the land. Inside, the house remained still. Morning did not arrive with light. It arrived with quiet. The storm had moved on sometime before dawn, leaving behind a deep, pressing stillness that felt heavier than the wind had been. Inside the earth house, the air held steady, neither warming nor cooling in any noticeable way. Nathan woke slowly, surprised to find that his breath no longer formed clouds in front of his face. The embers in the long hearth had dimmed to a soft red line, but the room itself remained gently warm, as if it had not noticed the fire fading. He sat up and placed his palm against the wall beside him. The surface was firm and dry, faintly textured where roots and packed soil pressed together. It was not warm in the way a stove was warm, but it wasn't cold either. It felt neutral, steady, like something that had decided on a temperature long ago and saw no reason to change it. "That's the wall," Thomas said from across the room, his voice low but awake. "Feels the same whether the fire's high or low." Nathan frowned. "It should be freezing. It's all dirt and snow out there." "Out there," Thomas replied. "In here, it's memory." Elias was already on his feet, moving quietly, feeding the hearth with a few carefully chosen pieces of fuel. He did not rush. He never did. The fire responded slowly, brightening without flaring, as if it understood the rules of the place. Samuel stretched and swung his legs down from the platform. He pressed his hand flat against the wall too, mimicking Nathan without comment. He had touched these walls countless times before, but this morning felt different. The storm had tested the house in a way he had not fully understood until now. He could feel it in the way the warmth lingered, stubborn and patient. "The ground remembers," Elias said, noticing them. "Heat goes in slow, comes out slow. That's what keeps us alive when the fire sleeps." A small voice broke the quiet. "Why isn't it cold?" Lily Cole stood near the entrance, wrapped in a wool coat that nearly swallowed her small frame. She was 7 years old, with pale skin that flushed easily, and hair the colour of dry straw pulled into 2 uneven braids. Her eyes were wide and curious, more observant than fearful. She had arrived the night before with Nathan, clinging to his coat during the ride in. The cold affected her more quickly than it did adults, settling into her bones with alarming speed. Nathan had worried about her constantly since they arrived, counting her breaths at night, checking her hands for warmth. Now she pressed her mittened palm against the wall, then pulled it back and pressed it again, as if testing whether the sensation would change. "It should be cold," she said again, not accusing, just confused. Sarah knelt beside her, up close. Sarah's face showed the quiet lines of a woman who had spent years watching weather more closely than people. She removed Lily's mitten gently and placed the child's bare hand back against the wall. "Feel that?" Sarah asked. Lily nodded. "It's not warm, but it's not cold." "That's because it's holding yesterday," Sarah said, "and the day before that, and the week before." Lily considered this. "So the wall remembers being warm?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Better than we do." Nathan watched, something loosening in his chest. He had spent his life thinking of walls as barriers, things that kept outside out and inside in. Here, the wall was something else entirely. It was a storehouse, a witness. As the others stirred, the house filled with soft movement. Blankets were folded and stacked. Tools were shifted into place. Moth emerged, stretched, and hopped lightly onto the wall ledge, where the air was warmest, settling herself with a satisfied flick of her tail. Bear rose near the entrance and shook, snow dust falling from his coat, as if he had carried a piece of the storm in with him. Outside, Elias opened the door just enough to check the weather. A blade of cold slipped in, sharp and sudden, then vanished as the door was closed again. "Clear," he said. "Colder." Samuel pulled on his boots. "Walls will hold," he said, more confidently than before. They gathered near the hearth for a simple breakfast. There was no table, no chairs. People ate where they sat, close enough to share warmth, far enough to move freely. Steam rose from metal cups and vanished into the air. Nathan noticed that, even as the fire brightened, the temperature of the room barely changed. The warmth did not spike. It settled. "Back home," Nathan said, turning the cup in his hands. "We'd crank the heater high when it got cold, burn fuel fast. Place would get hot, then cold again as soon as it shut off. And you'd keep feeding it," Thomas said, "always chasing the cold." Nathan nodded. "Never caught it." Elias tapped the wall with his knuckles. "This doesn't chase. It waits." Lily finished her drink and slid closer to the wall again, pressing her shoulder against it now. "I like this," she said. "It feels like the house is hugging me." Sarah smiled, brief and genuine. "That's because it is." Later, as the day wore on, if it could be called day at all, Nathan stepped outside with Elias to help clear drifted snow from the entrance. The cold bit instantly, sharper than before. His breath fogged thickly, eyelashes frosting over within minutes. When he returned inside, the contrast startled him. The warmth did not rush to meet him. It simply remained, unchanged, as if the house had not noticed his absence. "That's what the walls do," Elias said, watching Nathan rub his hands. "They don't react. They remember." Nathan pressed his back to the wall again, closing his eyes. He thought of the heaters he had known, loud and demanding, always hungry. This place asked for patience instead of fuel. Samuel sat nearby, sketching a rough cross-section of the house in his notebook. The roof buried under snow, the thick layers of turf and earth, the narrow entrance angled down. He labelled each layer carefully. "It's like layers of clothing," he said. "You don't just wear one big coat. You wear layers that trap air." "Exactly," Elias said. Lily leaned over Samuel's shoulder. "Can you draw me in it?" she asked. Samuel smiled and added a small stick figure inside the walls. "You're right here," he said, "where it's safest." As the hours passed, The fire was allowed to dip again. No one rushed to feed it. The house stayed warm. The walls gave back what they had taken in. Slowly, evenly. Nathan realized he was no longer watching the embers with anxiety. The house itself had become the source of comfort. By evening, the cold outside deepened. Frost crept along the snow in delicate patterns, unseen but relentless. Inside, people prepared for night, as they always did, confident in the quiet labor of the walls. Nathan helped Sarah lay out the blankets, noting how they were placed not for softness, but for function. How each layer mattered. Lily curled up between him and the wall, her breathing evening out quickly. "Tomorrow," Nathan said softly, "I'll help pack more snow against the outside." Sarah nodded. The walls remember more when you help them. As the fire was banked for the night, the house settled into itself once more. The warmth held. The walls remembered. The first sound of danger did not come from the wind. It came from silence breaking. Nathan was nearest the door when it happened. Morning had not fully formed yet. Only a dull blue-grey light pressing weakly against the earth-covered roof. Inside the house, order had already begun. The fire was awake, but restrained. Blankets were folded. Tools were returned to their hooks. The routines were familiar now, their rhythm quiet and precise. Nathan moved toward the entrance with the intention of checking the outside temperature. He had done this twice already that week, each time learning something new about the cold, about how quickly it punished hesitation. Today, however, his attention slipped. His thoughts wandered to his old cabin, to the way he used to stand in open doorways back home, letting cold air roll through without consequence. Habit guided his hand more than awareness. The door opened wider than it should have. Cold surged in like a living thing. It did not drift. It did not creep. It poured along the ground, heavy and aggressive, immediately seeking the warmest space. Frosted air curled around ankles and calves. The fire responded with a sudden flicker, smoke shuddering as the balance of the room broke. "Close it," Elias said sharply. Nathan hesitated. Not from defiance, but surprise. The cold was louder than he expected, carrying a low, hollow pressure that filled his ears. Snow hissed as it scraped against the threshold. For half a second too long, the boundary remained open. "Now," Sarah said, already moving. Samuel reached the door at the same time as Nathan, grabbing the heavy wood and pulling inward. The door shut with a dull, final thud. Elias dropped a piece of fuel into the hearth to stabilize the fire. Sarah ushered Lily back toward the wall, her hand firm but calm. The house went still. The silence returned, but it was different now. Tighter. Alert. Cold lingered near the floor. Unwelcome, but contained. Slowly, deliberately, it retreated, absorbed by the packed earth, swallowed by the walls that had been waiting all along. Nathan stood frozen, not from temperature, but realization. His breath came too fast. "I didn't think," he began. "You don't think at the door," Elias interrupted, not angry, just precise. "You remember." Lily looked up at Nathan, her expression serious, in a way children rarely manage. "The house didn't like that," she said. Sarah crouched beside her, The house forgave it, she corrected gently. Once. Nathan rubbed his hands together, embarrassed heat rising to his face, despite the chill still clinging to the awe. Back home, doors were just doors, he said quietly. You open them. You close them. Samuel nodded. Here, they're decisions. Bear, the dog, had retreated from the entrance during the rush. Now he returned, sniffing the seam of the door, hackles slightly raised. He was a large animal, nearly 8 years old, with a thick black and brown coat gone grey at the muzzle. He had lived through more winters than Nathan, and trusted the house in a way people sometimes did not. He lay down directly in front of the entrance, body angled protectively, as if reinforcing the barrier with his own weight. Moth, the cat, had not moved at all. She remained perched on her ledge, eyes half closed, tail wrapped neatly around her paws. She trusted boundaries. She always had. Elias waited until the room had fully settled before speaking again. Outside, he said, there is no negotiation. Wind doesn't care if you're tired. Cold doesn't care if you're careful. The house is where rules apply. And the door? Nathan asked. The door is where rules stop, Elias replied. On one side, we agree how things work. On the other, nothing agrees with us. They resumed their tasks, but the mood had shifted. Movements were quieter, more deliberate. The lesson had been absorbed. Later that day, Samuel took Lily aside and showed her how the entrance was built. The passage angled downward, forcing anyone entering to bow slightly, to slow. The walls narrowed near the threshold, creating resistance to rushing air. The door makes you humble, Samuel said, tapping the frame. Even strong people have to bend. Lily traced the wood with her finger. So the cold can't run in fast. Exactly. Nathan watched from a distance, replaying the moment in his mind. He realized something uncomfortable, but important. The house had rules, and he was still learning them. Survival here was not about strength or endurance. It was about respecting boundaries, without exception. As evening approached, the wind returned, though weaker than the night before. It whispered against the buried walls, searching for openings that did not exist. The house did not respond. At dusk, Elias prepared to step outside to check the fuel stores. He layered carefully, moved efficiently, and opened the door just enough to slip through. The cold entered briefly, like a warning glance, then vanished as the door closed behind him. Inside, nothing changed. Lily noticed. It didn't get colder. No, Sarah said, because the door knew what to do. Nathan exhaled slowly. He had spent years thinking of shelters as objects, things you owned or built. Here, the house felt more like a system that required discipline. One mistake did not mean death, but it invited it closer than necessary. When Elias returned, snow dusted his shoulders, but the house accepted him without complaint. The door closed. The boundary held. That night, as the fire was banked and blankets laid out, Nathan took a position farther from the entrance than usual, not out of fear, but respect. He lay with his back to the wall, Lily already asleep beside him, her breathing slow and even. The wind howled briefly outside, testing the earth, the roof, the door. It failed. Inside, order remained. The fire woke before the people did, but only barely. What remained of it after the night was not flame, not light, but a line of dark embers hidden beneath ash, breathing slowly, like something asleep rather than extinguished. The house itself was quiet, holding the warmth that had been stored the day before. No one rushed to stir the hearth. There was no urgency. Here, fire was never commanded. It was guided. Samuel was the first to rise. He moved carefully, stepping down from the sleeping platform without waking Lily or Nathan. At 58, Samuel had the posture of a man who had learned to conserve effort. His hair was iron grey, cut short not for style, but practicality, and his hands bore the thickened skin of years spent working with tools rather than paper. He had once believed fire was something to overpower the cold with. Alaska had corrected him quickly. He knelt beside the hearth and brushed ash aside, just enough to reveal the faint red beneath. He did not blow. He did not poke. He waited, watching the embers respond to air on their own. Elias observed from the other side of the room. He said nothing at first. He never corrected too early. Samuel reached for a piece of fuel instinctively, a thicker block, the kind he would have added back home when he wanted heat fast. His hand hovered. "No," Elias said softly. Samuel paused, then withdrew his hand. "Too much." "Too proud," Elias replied. He stepped closer and picked up a thinner piece, almost unimpressive in size. Fire here doesn't need to be impressive. It needs to last. He laid the fuel across the embers with care, not stacking, not piling, but aligning it so that heat could move evenly along its length. The embers brightened slightly. No flare, no drama. Nathan watched, learning. He stood with his arms crossed, his shoulders still broad from years of physical work, but his posture had changed since arriving. He no longer leaned toward the fire, as if it was something to conquer. He stood back now, attentive. "Back home," Nathan said quietly, "we'd build it high. Big flames meant safety. And empty stores by midwinter," Elias said. Sarah entered then, carrying a bundle of tools that needed warming before use. She was tall and lean, her movements economical, her face calm but weathered by responsibility rather than age. Years ago, she had lost her husband to a river that thawed too early. Since then, she trusted systems more than strength, habits more than hope. She placed the tools near the hearth, not on it, close enough to benefit from the heat without stealing it. "Fire that shouts burns itself out," she said. "Fire that whispers stays." Lily stirred, sitting up slowly, hair tangled, eyes still heavy with sleep. She watched the hearth for a moment, then frowned. "Why is it so small?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Because it knows its job." Lily slid closer, careful to keep distance, and studied the embers as if they might explain themselves. "Does it get tired?" "No," Sarah said. "It gets greedy if we let it." Moth appeared near the hearth then, stretching delicately before choosing a spot just beyond the reach of heat. She settled with precision, a creature that understood moderation instinctively. Bear remained farther back, head resting on his paws, content with warmth carried through the floor. rather than direct heat. As the morning progressed, the fire grew only slightly. It never roared. It never cracked. It glowed, steady and controlled. Its heat spreading not through air alone, but into stone, earth, wood. The house accepted it slowly, storing what it could without protest. Samuel practiced under Elias's watchful eye. Each time he placed fuel, he adjusted, learned to leave space, to think in hours rather than minutes. His old instincts betrayed him more than once. "It feels wrong," Samuel admitted. "Like I'm doing too little." "That feeling," Elias said, "is what kills people." Outside, the wind returned briefly, testing the walls again. Inside, the fire did not react. It did not need to. The house already held enough warmth to withstand the change. By midday, Nathan helped Samuel rearrange the hearthstones, clearing ash carefully, preserving what mattered. He noticed how the heat lingered in the stones long after his hands moved away. "It's not the fire that keeps us warm," Nathan said slowly. "It's everything the fire touches." Elias nodded once. That evening, when the fire was prepared for the night, Samuel performed the task himself. He gathered embers, spread ash with practiced restraint, and stepped back without adding more fuel than necessary. The fire dimmed, obedient. As darkness settled again, the house held. The fire slept, humble and contained. Night did not fall all at once. It arrived in layers, each darker than the last, settling over the land outside, until the distinction between ground and sky disappeared entirely. Inside the earth house, the change was marked not by light, but by sound. Voices softened, footsteps slowed. The fire's presence shifted from active companion to something quieter, more watchful. This was the hour when mistakes mattered most. Samuel stood near the hearth, aware of the weight of the task ahead of him. He had learned how to feed the fire during the day, how to keep it modest, how to let it warm stone instead of air. But night was different. Night demanded restraint, not attention. The fire would be left alone for hours, expected to survive without guidance, without correction. Margaret watched him from the sleeping platform. She was the oldest person in the house, well into her 70s. Her body small and slightly bent, but her presence carried a kind of calm authority that did not need to assert itself. Her hair was white and thin, pulled back into a simple knot. Her hands, though spotted with age, were steady, shaped by decades of repetitive, careful work. Margaret had been born in a similar house farther north, raised by people who did not survive long enough to explain why their methods worked. Only that they did. She had outlived them. "You're thinking too hard," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Fire doesn't like being overthought." Samuel glanced at her, half smiling. "I don't want to kill it." Margaret rose slowly and came to stand beside him. She leaned on a short wooden staff, not because she needed it to walk, but because she liked having something solid beneath her hand. "You won't kill it," she said. "You'll smother it, or you'll starve it. Both come from impatience." She knelt with difficulty, settling close to the hearth. "Watch." The embers glowed a deep red, spread thin along the length of the fire trough. Margaret used a long iron tool to draw them inward, not piling them, but nudging them close enough that their heat could support itself. She moved slowly, pausing often, feeling the resistance through the handle rather than watching the color alone. "Fire breathes," she said. "Too much air, it eats. Too little, it sleeps too deep." Samuel nodded, absorbing every motion. Margaret reached for ash. Not fresh, not powdery, but fine and dry from days of burning. She lifted a small amount and let it fall gently over the embers. Not dumping, not spreading yet. She watched how the glow dimmed, then stopped. "Not yet," she said, reading Samuel's expression before he spoke. "You don't cover fire because you're done with it. You cover it because you trust it." She added more ash, layer by layer, smoothing it until the embers were hidden but not sealed. The glow vanished completely. "It looks dead," Lily whispered from behind them. Margaret turned her head slightly. "It looks resting." Nathan watched with a knot in his chest. He remembered mornings back home when the fire had gone out completely. The panic of relighting in freezing air, the wasted fuel. Here, the act of banking the fire felt ceremonial, almost sacred. "How thick?" Samuel asked. Margaret pressed her fingers into the ash, measuring by feel alone. Enough that it won't rush. Not enough that it won't wake. She stood slowly, breathing carefully. 2 fingers, if you must count. But better to feel. Sarah approached, placing a blanket around Margaret's shoulders without comment. The 2 women shared a look that suggested long familiarity. Sarah had learned from Margaret when she first arrived years ago, after the river took her husband and left her with nothing but winter and a choice. "The fire will hold," Sarah said, more statement than reassurance. Margaret nodded. "It always does, if we let it." The house prepared for sleep. Blankets were laid out. The dog circled twice before settling near the hearth, instinctively choosing the zone that would remain warmest through the night. Moth tucked herself against the wall, tail wrapped tightly, already half asleep. Samuel sat back, watching the hearth long after it had gone dark. He felt a strange relief, not because the work was done, but because it had been done correctly. "What happens if it goes out?" Lily asked quietly. Margaret answered before anyone else could. "Then morning is harder than it needs to be. That's all." The wind returned outside, low and distant. Inside, the fire slept beneath its blanket of ash, holding heat like a promise. Nathan lay down beside Lily, listening to the subtle sounds of the house. The settling of wood, the slow breathing of people and animals, the faintest hiss from beneath the ash as the fire continued its patient work. He understood now. Banking the fire was not about the night. It was about trusting the morning to arrive. The house grew quiet. Night settled fully after the fire was banked. The house did not announce the transition. It simply shifted. Sounds softened, movements slowed, and the space between people closed without anyone giving an order. The sleeping platforms along the wall became the center of gravity, not as furniture, but as function. This was where the house completed its work. Nathan stood near the edge of the platform, uncertain. He had been quiet since Margaret finished banking the fire, but the unease had been building in him for hours. It surfaced now, when blankets were unfolded, and people began to arrange themselves not by preference, but by necessity. Children were guided inward. Older bodies were placed where warmth would linger longest. No one asked where they wanted to sleep. They simply moved where they were needed. Nathan hesitated when Sarah gestured for him to sit. "Here," she said, patting the space beside her, already occupied on the other side by Lily, half asleep and leaning into the wall. Nathan did not move immediately. His shoulders tightened. "I can take the end," he said, "closer to the door." "I don't mind." Sarah looked at him, measuring not his words but the reason behind them. Up close, her height was more apparent. Tall and narrow, built like someone who had learned early how to conserve heat and energy. Her expression was calm, but not soft. Winter had taken softness from her long ago, along with the husband she had loved and buried when the ice broke early, and the river took him under. "This isn't about comfort," she said. "It's about heat." "I don't like sleeping that close," Nathan said, his voice low, "with people I don't really know." The room did not stop moving, but several people listened. Samuel paused mid-motion, folding a blanket. Margaret lifted her head slightly. Elias did not turn around, but his hands stilled. Sarah nodded once. "Most people don't," she said. "At first." Nathan exhaled sharply. Back home, everyone had their own bed, their own room, privacy. "And heat," Sarah replied. "You had heat." Lily stirred at the sound of Nathan's voice and looked up at him, her eyes clouded with sleep. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "No," Nathan said quickly. He sat down, but left a careful gap between himself and Sarah, his body angled away, as if space itself could be preserved through posture. Sarah did not correct him immediately. She let the moment pass, then spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "Sleeping alone feels safer because you're used to it. Here, it's the opposite." Nathan frowned. "How can being pressed against strangers be safer?" "Because bodies make heat," she said, "and heat keeps blood moving, and moving blood keeps you alive." Margaret spoke from the other end of the platform, her voice carrying without effort. "People who insist on space don't last long in winters like this." Nathan stiffened. "I'm not insisting. I'm just used to choosing," Margaret finished. "That's the dangerous part." The house settled further as more people lay down. Blankets were pulled up. Layers overlapped. The platform became a continuous surface of bodies, wool, and skin. There were no edges now, only a gradual transition from one person to the next. Nathan lay rigid, aware of every point of contact. Sarah's shoulder brushed his arm. Lily's back pressed lightly against his side. Someone's feet rested near his calves. He resisted the instinct to shift away, to reclaim space that did not belong to him anymore. Bear settled at the foot of the platform, his thick body radiating heat upward. He had chosen his position carefully, as he always did, placing himself where the youngest and weakest slept. Moth crept into a narrow pocket near the wall, curling tightly, her small body adding its own insignificant but real warmth to the whole. The air grew still. Minutes passed. Then more. Nathan's breathing slowed despite himself. He became aware of something he had not expected. The warmth was different, not the dry, artificial heat of forced air or metal radiators, but a layered warmth, uneven, yet persistent. It came from below, from beside him, from the wall behind his back. It wrapped rather than blasted. "You'll stop noticing the closeness," Sarah murmured, sensing his tension even in the dark. "Or you won't. Either way, your body will." Nathan swallowed. What if someone moves? What if... "They will," Sarah said. "And you will too. That's how it works." As if on cue, Samuel shifted nearby, adjusting a blanket. The movement caused a subtle redistribution of warmth. Someone else responded unconsciously, pulling closer. The group adjusted itself like a living thing, responding to changes without waking. Lily's breathing deepened. She slept easily, her small body tucked between adults, insulated by bodies that produced far more heat than she ever could. Nathan felt her warmth increase against his side and realized with a quiet shock that this arrangement was not accidental. It was deliberate, calculated. Outside, the wind rose again, testing the land. Inside, the sound was swallowed whole by earth and turf. The house remained sealed, the boundary intact. Nathan closed his eyes. Images from his old life surfaced uninvited. A bed too big for one person. A room too quiet. The hum of a heater cycling on and off. He had thought those things were comfort. He understood now that they were luxuries built on abundance, not resilience. Sarah's hand brushed his arm briefly. Not an embrace, not even reassurance. Just contact. Heat shared without ceremony. "Sleep," she said softly. "You don't have to like it. You just have to trust it." Nathan did not answer. He did not need to. The night deepened. Bodies relaxed. The collective warmth stabilized. The house held steady. The banked fire doing its slow, patient work beneath ash and stone. Nathan drifted into sleep without realizing when it happened. His resistance dissolving not through argument, but through temperature. By the time the coldest hours arrived, the platform was warm enough that no one stirred. Sleeping alone, Nathan would later realize, was not independence. It was exposure. The coldest hour came without warning. There was no sound to announce it, no sudden drop that could be felt immediately. It arrived quietly, in the way pressure changes deep underwater. Subtle, cumulative, undeniable. Outside, the temperature sank far below what any exposed body could tolerate. Inside the earth house, the change registered only as a gentle tightening of the air, a slight insistence that drew bodies closer together without waking them fully. The house responded first. The walls released what they had stored during the day. Not all at once, but evenly, like a long exhale. The floor retained its faint warmth. The banked fire, buried beneath ash, continued its slow chemical whisper, contributing just enough to prevent loss, never enough to draw attention to itself. But it was not the house that carried the night. It was the people. Nathan drifted near wakefulness, suspended in that shallow place where the body senses before the mind interprets. He became aware of heat, layered, uneven, alive. Lily's back pressed firmly against his chest now, closer than she had been when they first lay down. Her small body had shifted inward during the night, guided by instinct rather than intention. On her other side, Sarah slept with one arm curved protectively, her breathing slow and deep. Nathan did not move. He could feel it clearly now. Warmth radiating not from a single source, but from everywhere. From Sarah's shoulder, from Lily's small spine, from the legs of the man sleeping behind him, from Bear, whose massive body anchored the lower end of the platform. Heat rising steadily upward. Even the cat contributed. A small concentrated pocket of warmth pressed into the crook near the wall. 15 people lay along the platforms that night. 15 adult bodies, each producing heat without effort, without fuel. Nathan's mind, half dreaming, did the calculation instinctively. He had worked in construction long enough to know energy figures. Each body gave off warmth simply by being alive. Together, they formed a system. Lily stirred slightly, a soft sound escaping her throat. Not distress, but adjustment. She shifted again, instinctively seeking deeper warmth. Sarah's arm tightened just enough to guide her back into place. Between two adults, where the air was warmest and most stable. Lily settled immediately, her breathing smoothing out. She had done this every night since arriving. Earlier, Nathan had asked why Lily always ended up in the middle, no matter where she was placed at first. Sarah had answered simply, without drama. Children don't regulate heat well, she had said. Their bodies know it, even if their minds don't. Now, watching Lily sleep, Nathan understood. Alone, Lily's small body lost heat faster than it could produce it. Between two adults, her temperature stabilized without effort. Her sleep deepened, her muscles relaxed. Her body stopped fighting. Margaret, sleeping several places down the platform, shifted as well. Even in sleep, she responded to changes in temperature, drawing closer to Samuel, who had learned without instruction to position himself, so his back blocked drafts from the wall. Margaret had taught many people how to survive winter. Tonight, she did it unconsciously, simply by existing near others. The night deepened further. Breathing became the dominant sound, layered, unsynchronized, steady. The house absorbed it, leaving no echo, no amplification, just presence. Each inhale drew in cold air from lungs already warmed by shared heat. Each exhale returned it, slightly warmer, slightly damp, contributing to the small enclosed climate the sleepers created together. Nathan realized something that unsettled him. No one was alone in this room. Not physically, not thermally, not biologically. Even sleep was communal. He had grown up believing sleep was private, something done behind doors, in isolation. Here, privacy was replaced by proximity, and proximity by survival. The trade was not philosophical. It was practical. Somewhere near the far end of the platform, one of the younger men, Aaron, a quiet figure with a narrow frame and sharp features, shifted restlessly. He was new to the house, newer even than Nathan, and still learning where his body belonged at night. His movements created a small disturbance in the shared heat field. Almost immediately, others adjusted. Samuel rolled slightly, closing the gap. Someone else pulled a blanket higher. The system compensated without waking anyone fully. Heat redistributed. Stability returned. Nathan watched this happen with growing awe. This was not accidental. It was not kindness. It was not tradition for tradition's sake. It was physics. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the buried walls, searching for weakness. Inside, the temperature held within a narrow range. Cool enough to sleep, warm enough to live. The house did not fight the cold directly. It allowed the people inside to do that. Together, Lily murmured once, a half-formed word that meant nothing and everything. Sarah did not wake, but her hand moved, fingers resting briefly on Lily's shoulder. The contact lasted less than a second. It was enough. Nathan felt something loosen in his chest then, something he had been holding since the night he arrived. He had thought survival meant vigilance, separation, control. He understood now that it also meant surrender, allowing oneself to become part of a larger system. If he pulled away, the system weakened. If he stayed, it held. The coldest hour passed. By the time the temperature outside reached its lowest point, the interior of the house had stabilized completely. The combined heat of 15 bodies had warmed the sleeping platforms themselves. The wooden planks beneath them absorbed and redistributed that warmth, extending it beyond individual contact points. The platform was no longer just a surface. It was part of the heating system. Nathan slept. He dreamed briefly. Not of his old home, but of warmth moving like water, flowing where needed, pooling where protected. When he surfaced toward wakefulness again, the darkness had begun to thin almost imperceptibly. Morning would come, not because the cold allowed it, but because the system had endured. Morning did not wake the house so much as loosen it. The darkness thinned slightly, not enough to be called light, but enough that shapes regained their edges. Breathing deepened, then slowed again as bodies stirred without rising. The coldest hours had passed, carried by the combined warmth of people, walls, and fire. Now the house held a steady calm, like a held note that had not yet been released. Nathan woke with the unfamiliar sensation of having slept deeply without shivering. He lay still for a moment, aware first of warmth, then of layers. His body was not pressed against a mattress or a single heavy covering, but wrapped within a careful arrangement of materials. Coarse wool against his skin, something lighter and drier beneath that, and above him, a thick animal hide blanket that did not sag or cling, but rested with a certain stiffness. Air was trapped everywhere, invisible but present. He lifted one edge carefully. The underside was not plush, it was practical. The hide was worn smooth in places, stiff in others. Beneath it lay a thick wool blanket, densely woven, its fibers rough but resilient. Under that, pressed between wood and cloth, was a layer of dry grass and straw, contained within a simple fabric sleeve. The straw crackled faintly when he touched it, releasing a faint, clean scent. Sarah noticed his movement and rolled onto her elbow, watching him with quiet interest. Up close, her face carried the signs of many winters, faint lines etched not by age alone, but by attention. Watching weather, watching people, watching time. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were alert. "You're awake early," she said softly. I didn't know blankets could work like this, Nathan replied, still lifting layers, examining them. Back home, thicker meant warmer. Sarah gave a short, humorless smile. Thicker means heavier. Heavier pushes air out. She reached over and adjusted the height, settling it back into place. Warmth lives in air, not weight. Lily stirred beside them, pushing her face deeper into the wool layer with a small, content sound. Her hair stuck up in uneven angles, cheeks flushed with healthy warmth. She had slept through the coldest part of the night without waking once. She won't sleep without the straw layer, Sarah added quietly. Tried once. Early on, she woke shivering, even with 2 blankets on top. Nathan frowned. Straw. Dry straw traps air better than cloth alone, Sarah said, but only if it stays dry. Everything here has a job. As the others woke, the house filled with soft sounds again. Blankets being folded, straw layers shaken and aired near the hearth. Hides hung briefly, where rising warmth could draw out moisture. There was no rush. The materials demanded care. Margaret moved slowly along the platform, inspecting the bedding with practiced hands. She pressed down, felt resistance, adjusted placement. Though small and bent with age, her authority here was unquestioned. She had buried 2 husbands, 3 siblings, and more winters than she could count. What remained of her was not fragile. This one needs airing, she said, tapping a rolled blanket near Thomas's place. Moisture crept in last night. Thomas nodded, already moving to comply. Wind shifted. It always does, Margaret replied. That's why we check. Nathan pulled on his coat instinctively as he rose, feeling the familiar weight of its thick insulation. He paused, then removed it again, surprised by how little he needed it inside. The coat, designed to fight cold directly, suddenly felt clumsy. Samuel noticed. You don't need that yet. Nathan shook his head slightly. It's strange. That coat cost more than everything I slept under combined, and it didn't keep me half as warm last night. Samuel smiled faintly. He was younger than Nathan by a decade, but his eyes held the quiet confidence of someone raised inside systems rather than objects. Clothes stop wind, he said. Bedding holds air. Bear rose and shook himself, then nosed into the pile of blankets briefly before retreating. His thick fur was its own layered system. Guard hairs, undercoat, skin, all designed to trap air. He lay down again with a grunt. Satisfied, Moth leapt down from her ledge and padded across the bedding, testing spots with careful paws before choosing a warm fold near the wall. She curled tightly, tail over nose, becoming a perfect circle of trapped warmth. Nathan watched, understanding now that nothing here was accidental, not even where the cat slept. As the morning tasks continued, Sarah showed Lily how to help. The child learned to lift blankets without dragging them, to keep straw layers enclosed, to hang hides where warmth, not flame, would dry them. Lily took the instructions seriously, her small hands mimicking Sarah's movements with intense focus. Why not use softer things? Lily asked at one point, touching the coarse wool. Because softness flattens, Sarah replied. Flat things don't hold air. Nathan bent down beside them. Like snow, he said slowly. Fresh snow is warm. Packed snow is cold. Sarah looked at him, surprised again. This time, her smile stayed a moment longer. You're learning. Later, as they prepared for the day's work, Nathan layered himself differently. Instead of piling on his thick coat immediately, he added a wool layer, then another, leaving space between them. He felt warmer. Not from heat, but from stability. He glanced back at the bedding piled neatly along the wall. It was not beautiful. It was not comfortable in the way city comfort was defined. But it worked. At the entrance, Elias paused, watching Nathan adjust his clothing. Blankets teach better than coats, he said. Nathan nodded. I think I finally understand why. Elias opened the door just enough to step through, cold air slicing briefly into the house. It touched the blankets, the straw, the hides, and stopped. The layers held. When the door closed again, the warmth returned without effort. Nathan exhaled slowly. For the first time, he stopped thinking about adding more. More fire. More layers. More protection. What mattered was how things were arranged. The work of the day ended early. Not because there was nothing left to do, but because daylight, what little there was of it, could no longer be trusted. Outside, the cold tightened again, steady and deliberate. Inside the earth house, evening arrived in a different way. Tools were brought closer to the hearth. Bundles were untied. Hands reached for tasks that required patience rather than strength. This was the hour when children learned. The fire was kept low, long and narrow, just bright enough to give shape to hands and objects without wasting heat. Shadows lay soft against the curved walls. The house became smaller, more focused, its attention drawn inward. Samuel sat near the hearth, with a length of rawhide stretched between his hands. Across from him was old Ben, the eldest man still able to work regularly. Ben was tall once, people said, but years of cold and labour had bent him forward. His shoulders sloped now, his spine curved, but his hands were remarkably steady. Thick fingers, scarred and darkened, moved with a confidence that came from decades of repetition. His beard was long and white, braided loosely to keep it out of his work, and his eyes, pale and sharp, missed nothing. Slow, Ben said, not unkindly. You rush. The fibers fight back. Samuel adjusted his grip. He was strong for his age, broad-shouldered and steady, but strength was not what this task required. He leaned forward, brow furrowed, tongue pressed lightly against his teeth in concentration. I keep pulling it too tight, he admitted. Ben nodded. That's because you think tight means strong. Rope doesn't work like that. It needs room to move. He took the rawhide and demonstrated, twisting gently, letting the strands find each other rather than forcing them together. You don't make rope by commanding it. You guide it. Samuel watched closely, memorizing the angle of Ben's wrists, the rhythm of the motion. He had seen rope his entire life, holding sleds, binding loads, saving people from rivers. But this was the first time he was being taught how to make it from the beginning. Nearby, Lily sat cross-legged beside Sarah, her small hands busy with wool. Sarah guided her fingers patiently. showing her how to draw fibers evenly, how to feel when the strand was about to break. Sarah's posture was upright, but relaxed. Her long frame folded comfortably near the fire. Her voice was low and steady, shaped by years of explaining things only once, and expecting them to be remembered. Even pressure, Sarah said. Your hands should feel the same the whole way. Lily nodded seriously, mimicking the motion with exaggerated care. Her tongue peeked out in concentration. If I pull too hard, it snaps. Yes, Sarah replied. And if you pull too soft, it won't hold. Nathan watched from a short distance away, repairing a cracked wooden handle under Thomas's supervision. Thomas was thin and quiet, his movements economical. He rarely spoke unless asked, but when he did, his words were precise. Don't replace it, Thomas said, pointing to the crack. Bind it. Nathan frowned. It won't be as strong. It will be stronger where it needs to be, Thomas said. And lighter. Nathan followed the instruction, wrapping the handle with thin cord, tightening gradually. He thought of Samuel's rope lesson and realized the same rule applied here. Strength came from flexibility, not force. The house hummed with quiet industry. No one raised their voice. No one hurried. Children worked alongside adults, not separated, not sheltered from complexity. Mistakes were corrected gently, but firmly. Knowledge moved from hand to hand, not through lectures, but through shared action. Margaret sat slightly apart, watching rather than working. Her hands rested in her lap, folded loosely. She had taught these lessons many times over the years, and now she observed how they were being passed on. Her face, lined deeply with age, was calm. When I was young, she said suddenly, her voice soft but clear. We didn't have evenings like this. Heads turned. We were always trying to catch up, always chasing something we'd lost earlier in the day. Tools broke. Rope failed. People got hurt. We learned then. Night is when you fix what daylight breaks. Samuel looked up. So we're not resting. Margaret smiled faintly. We're resting the parts of us that don't need muscle. The fire crackled once, then settled again, obedient to the rules it had been taught. Its light glinted off metal, wood, fibre, off hands that knew what to do, and hands that were still learning. Nathan felt something shift in him. Back home, evenings had meant escape. Noise, distraction, forgetting the day. Here, evening meant repair, preparation, passing on what mattered before sleep took it away. Ben handed Samuel the finished length of rope. It was not perfect. The strands varied slightly, but it held. You'll make better ones, Ben said, if you live long enough. Samuel smiled, quiet pride lighting his face. Lily held up her spun wool, uneven, but intact. Is this good? Sarah inspected it, then nodded. It will keep something warm. That was praise enough. As the night deepened, work slowed naturally. Tools were set aside. Materials were bundled and stored. Children yawned, their bodies tiring, even as their minds stayed alert. Nathan leaned back against the wall, watching Lily curl up near Sarah, the half-finished wool still in her hands. He understood now that these evenings were not optional. They were how children learned not just skills, but rhythm, when to work, when to stop, when to listen. Outside, winter pressed close. Inside, knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. The house held. The work ended without announcement. Hands slowed. Tools were set aside. Wool and cord were bundled and returned to their places. The fire was adjusted slightly. Not to burn brighter, but to glow just enough that faces could still be seen. This was the moment when the house shifted again, not towards sleep, but towards something older. Stories. They did not begin with a signal. No one asked for silence. It happened naturally, as breathing quieted and bodies leaned inward. Children settled closer to adults. Even those who had been restless moments before grew still, as if the walls themselves were listening. Abigail cleared her throat softly. She sat near the hearth, her back straight despite her age. Abigail was not old in the way Margaret was old, bent and compacted by time. She was perhaps in her early 60s, tall and narrow, with long grey hair worn loose over her shoulders. Her face was sharp, almost severe at first glance, but her eyes carried a depth that softened her features when she spoke. She had arrived at the house years earlier, after a winter crossing that killed half the group she travelled with. Since then, she had become the keeper of stories. Not because she spoke the most, but because she remembered the most clearly. Abigail did not tell stories for entertainment. She told them for continuity. When I was young, she began, her voice low and even. I thought winter was something you beat, something you survived once, and then forgot. Nathan leaned back against the wall, arms folded loosely, listening. He had heard stories his whole life, boasts, warnings, jokes. But this tone was different. There was no urgency in it, no need to persuade. I left a place much like this, Abigail continued. Not because it failed, but because I thought I didn't need it anymore. Lily leaned forward, eyes wide. Samuel shifted slightly, attentive. Even Elias angled his head, listening without looking. I built a house with straight walls, Abigail said, tall ones. I wanted windows. I wanted to see the land. I wanted space. She paused, letting the fire crackle softly. The land saw me instead. Nathan felt the words settle into him. Abigail described the winter that followed, the storms that came early, the fuel that burned too fast, the walls that lost heat as quickly as they gained it. She spoke of nights spent awake, feeding a fire that never seemed satisfied, and mornings that arrived colder than the ones before. I told myself I was strong, she said. I told myself strength would carry me through. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Margaret's eyes closed, not in sleep, but recognition. One night, Abigail went on, the fire went out. Not because there was no fuel, but because I was too tired to tend it. I woke before dawn and knew, without checking, that the house had already lost. She did not describe the details that followed. She did not need to. I walked until I found people again, she said simply, and I listened. The house remained silent. Nathan realized his hands had clenched into fists. He loosened them slowly. Abigail shifted her gaze to the children. Stories are not for comfort, she said. They are for memory. Memory is how we obey rules we didn't live long enough to learn ourselves. Samuel nodded slowly. Like why the house is low, he said. Why the fire stays small. Why the door is sacred, Margaret added. Why we sleep together, Sarah said quietly. Abigail smiled faintly. Yes. Nathan spoke before he fully realized he was going to. Back home, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Stories were things you told after you'd made it, after you'd won. Abigail looked at him directly. Her gaze was steady, not unkind. Here, stories are told before you make the mistake. Nathan swallowed. She continued, telling smaller stories now, of a boy who wandered too far during a whiteout and was found because he remembered the sound of the house at night, of a woman who ignored an old rule about moisture in bedding and paid for it with frost-bitten fingers, of a group that stopped telling stories altogether, convinced they knew enough, and slowly forgot why they did what they did. Each story carried a rule, but none was stated outright. The lessons were woven in, inseparable from the memory itself. Lily yawned, but did not look away. Moth crept closer to the hearth, settling near Abigail's feet. Bear shifted, resting his chin on his paws, eyes half closed but ears alert. Even the animals responded to the rhythm of the voice. Nathan felt something changing, not dramatically, not suddenly, but undeniably. He had come here believing survival was technical. Walls, fire, heat. He understood now that survival was also narrative. Without stories, the systems lost meaning. Without meaning, rules weakened. Without rules, people died. Abigail's final story was short. My mother used to say, she said, that winter doesn't care what you believe, but it notices what you remember. She fell silent then. No one rushed to fill the space. The fire dimmed slightly, embers shifting under ash. Shadows deepened along the curved walls. One by one, people leaned back, the stories settling into them like additional layers of warmth. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to hold on to the images. He knew that when the cold pressed hardest, it would not be a measurement or a rule that came to him first. It would be a story. The house grew quiet again. Its work done for the night. Not just holding heat, but holding memory. The days began to lose their edges. Nathan could no longer say exactly when one ended, and another began. There was no sunrise to mark a fresh start, no sunset to declare an ending. Instead, time moved in loops. Quiet, predictable, unbroken. And within those loops, something in his body began to change. At first, he noticed it in small ways. His shoulders no longer felt permanently raised, braced against cold that never fully arrived. His hands stopped trembling when he woke, the ache behind his eyes. The one that had followed him for weeks, born of poor sleep and constant alertness, faded without ceremony. It was not because the work was easier. If anything, the days were fuller now. Morning meant checking the entrance, packing snow where the wind had shifted it, feeding the fire just enough to wake it. Midday meant mending, hauling, preparing what little could be prepared in advance. Evening brought teaching, repair, stories. Night brought sleep, deep, collective, unbroken. Nothing changed. And that was the point. Nathan had spent most of his adult life chasing relief. Rest, to him, had always been something earned at the end of chaos, a brief reward between demands. Here, rest was not a reward. It was built into the structure of the day. The house did not allow improvisation. Sarah moved through the routines with the same steady pace each day. Tall and narrow, her movements were economical, almost ritualistic. She woke at the same time, folded the same blankets in the same order, spoke little. But when she did, it was always at the same moment. Corrections during work, guidance during teaching, quiet reassurance at night. Nathan had once asked her if she ever grew bored. "Boredom is a luxury," she had replied. "So is chaos." Samuel changed most visibly. The boy, no longer just a boy, Nathan realized, had begun to carry himself differently. His movements were less hurried, his attention more settled. He no longer rushed to finish tasks, but neither did he drag them out. He worked until the work was done, then stopped. The rhythm had entered him. Even Lily followed it. She no longer fought sleep, no longer startled awake in the night. Her body had learned when to be active and when to let go. Each evening, at nearly the same moment, she would yawn, curl inward, and settle between adults without prompting. Her small system synced effortlessly to the larger one. Margaret observed all of this with quiet satisfaction. She said little now, content to watch the rhythm take hold. Her small, weathered frame moved more slowly than others, but always in time. She had lived long enough to know that survival was not about intensity, but about endurance shaped by habit. Even the animals reflected the pattern. Bear rose and lay down at predictable intervals, choosing his place with precision. Moth appeared near the hearth at the same hour each night, her small body a punctuation mark at the end of the day. Neither needed instruction. They followed warmth, repetition, and trust. Nathan noticed something else too. His thoughts had slowed, not dulled, clarified. He no longer replayed past mistakes at night or rehearsed imagined futures. His mind followed the day as his body did, settling when it was time to settle, waking when it was time to wake. The anxiety that had once hummed beneath his thoughts, constant, low, exhausting, lost its grip when it found nothing to attach itself to. One night, after a fire was banked and the stories ended early, Nathan lay down and closed his eyes and slept. There was no drifting, no half-waking vigilance, no jolting return to consciousness at imagined sounds. His breathing deepened almost immediately. His muscles released their long-held tension. His body, finally convinced that tomorrow would resemble today, and that today had been survivable, let go. He slept through the night without moving. When he woke, he was confused. Not because something was wrong, but because nothing was. He felt rested in a way he had not felt in years. He sat up slowly, disoriented by the absence of fatigue. The house was quiet, but awake. The fire was already glowing faintly. Sarah was folding blankets. Samuel was tying off a repaired cord. Lily still slept, her face relaxed, cheeks warm. Margaret caught Nathan watching himself. "You slept," she said. Nathan nodded, almost embarrassed. "I didn't dream." Margaret smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips. "That means your body trusted the night." Later that day, as they worked, Nathan realized why this place felt different from every other hard place he had known. There was no guessing, no constant recalculation, no need to decide, every hour, what came next. The rhythm had already decided. Wake, work, prepare, teach, eat, sleep, repeat. The absence of choice, once terrifying to him, now felt like relief. That evening, Abigail spoke briefly, not a story, just an observation. People think fatigue comes from work, she said. It doesn't. It comes from unpredictability. Nathan understood instantly. His exhaustion back home had not come from labor alone, but from never knowing when rest would arrive, or whether it would last. Here, rest was guaranteed. Not because life was easy, but because it was structured. As night settled again, Nathan lay down without resistance. The bodies around him arranged themselves as they always did. The house held its temperature. The fire slept. The walls remembered. Nathan slept deeply again. The rhythm had taken him. The warning came hours before the cold itself. Ilias felt it first. Standing near the entrance with his palm pressed to the packed wall, the temperature inside the house had not changed, but the air carried a tension he had learned to respect. Outside, the wind did not rise suddenly. It gathered. It settled into the land like weight, patient and heavy. "This one won't pass quick," he said. No one asked what he meant. Everyone understood. The coldest night of winter was not defined by numbers. It was defined by duration, by how long the cold stayed without breaking, without easing, without offering relief. Nights like this did not forgive mistakes. They exposed them. The house responded immediately, not through panic, but through sequence. Sarah checked the bedding first, moving with precise efficiency. Tall and narrow, her shadow slid along the curved wall as she pressed each layer into place. Straw was fluffed to restore trapped air. Wool was shaken to release moisture. Hides were positioned where rising warmth would keep them dry. She did not speak while she worked. Words were unnecessary when reminders had already been given 100 times before. Samuel followed Elias to the hearth. The fire was awake but modest, exactly as it should be. They adjusted it together, aligning fuel lengthwise, ensuring no single section would burn hotter than the rest. The fire did not flare. It accepted the discipline. Margaret watched from her place near the platform, her small body wrapped in layers that had been repaired more times than anyone could count. Her eyes were sharp despite her age. She had lived through nights colder than this one. She knew what to look for. "Everyone stays in tonight," she said. "No checks unless the house asks for it." Nathan nodded, though his stomach tightened. He had learned enough by now to recognize the gravity in her voice. This was not a lesson. This was execution. Lily clung closer to Sarah than usual, sensing the shift without understanding it. Her small body pressed inward, seeking the stable warmth she had learned to trust. Sarah rested a hand on her back, grounding her. Outside, the storm arrived. The wind slammed into the land with a force that erased distance. Snow did not fall. It attacked, driven sideways so hard it scraped exposed skin like sand. The sound was no longer a howl, but a constant roar, a pressure that made the walls seem to lean inward, not from weakness, but from burden. Inside, the house held. The thick earth walls released their stored heat steadily, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. The floor remained warm beneath layers of bedding. The banked fire contributed without drawing attention to itself. Bodies gathered closer, not out of fear, but out of instinct, refined by repetition. Nathan felt the system activate around him. Every element mattered now. The door remained sealed. Bear positioned squarely against it, his large frame acting as an additional barrier. His breath was slow, steady, unfurring. Moth had disappeared into a tight pocket between bedding and wall, becoming a small, concentrated knot of warmth. Breathing synchronized. The storm worsened. Wind found every weakness in the land. Every ridge, every hollow, but found none in the house. Snow packed itself tighter against the walls, sealing them further. What would have crushed a standing structure only strengthened this one. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted inside. A draft. It was faint, barely noticeable, but Margaret felt it immediately. Her eyes opened. She scanned the room and saw the problem at the same moment Elias did. Nathan. He had shifted in his sleep. Drawn by discomfort, he did not yet understand. His shoulder had rolled, creating a narrow gap in the bedding where cold air could creep upward from the floor. It was not dramatic. It was dangerous. Sarah was already moving. She pressed the bedding back into place, tucking the straw layer firmly, restoring the seal. The draft vanished. The system stabilized. Nathan woke fully then, heart racing. "Aye," he began. Elias raised a hand, not in anger, but in finality. "No talking. Fix. Then rest." Nathan nodded, swallowing his apology. He did not need to say it. He understood now how small the margin was. One careless movement, one lapse. The house did not punish, but it did not compensate for neglect. The storm reached its peak shortly after. Outside, the cold pressed down so hard that even the ground groaned under it. Trees cracked in the distance. Any exposed surface lost heat faster than the human body could replace it. Inside, the temperature dipped slightly, but not catastrophically. The walls, the fire, the bodies compensated together. Heat redistributed. Children were guided closer to the center. Older bodies remained where they could lend warmth without strain. Lily whimpered once, half asleep. Sarah pulled her closer without waking her, her own body absorbing the chill before it could reach the child. Samuel shifted nearby, blocking airflow with his back. Nathan lay still, afraid to move, afraid not to. He focused on breathing evenly, on remaining part of the system, rather than disrupting it. His mind, once restless, now held only one thought: do not break the rhythm. Hours passed. The coldest point came and went. No one marked it. No one celebrated. Survival was not a moment. It was a process. Eventually, the wind eased. Not suddenly, but reluctantly, as if the storm itself had grown tired. Pressure lifted from the walls. The roar softened to a distant rush. Inside, the house exhaled. Margaret closed her eyes again, satisfied. Elias relaxed his shoulders. Sarah's breathing deepened. Lily slept on. unaware of how close the night had come. Nathan did not sleep again until the first hint of morning crept back into the world. When he finally did, it was not from exhaustion, but from trust. The system had held. Bao sao trung gash cheo hong trung shi tiet. Morning did not arrive with light. It arrived with continuity. Nathan woke to the faintest sound beneath the ash. A soft, patient whisper that told him the fire had kept its promise. He did not move at once. He lay still, listening, letting the house speak first. The walls were calm. The air was steady. Breathing around him rose and fell in a familiar pattern. The system had held through the night, and now it offered what it always offered in return: a chance to begin again. He rolled carefully onto his side and eased himself up, mindful of the bedding, of the layers that had been placed with such care. No sudden movements, no gaps. The discipline of the night extended into the morning. Across the room, Samuel was already awake, sitting near the hearth with his boots on, eyes fixed on the ash-covered trough, as if he were listening to a living thing. Nathan met his gaze. Samuel nodded once. They moved together without speaking. The fire was still hidden, banked exactly as Margaret had shown them. The ash lay smooth and unbroken, the surface of it pale and calm. Nathan knelt and felt for warmth with the back of his hand. It was there. Not hot, not dramatic, but undeniable. Heat remembered. Heat waiting. Samuel handed him the iron tool. His hands were steady now, more certain than they had been weeks ago. He had learned not just the motions, but the reasons behind them. Slow, Samuel murmured, repeating Ben's old instruction. Nathan brushed the ash aside, just enough to let air remember the embers. A dull red glow emerged, then deepened. He did not stir it. He waited. The glow spread on its own, like dawn travelling across a winter sky. Elias appeared at the edge of the light, watching. He did not interfere. He did not instruct. He simply observed the way he always had, measuring not success, but judgment. Nathan placed a thin piece of fuel along the length of the trough, aligning it rather than stacking it. He felt the old impulse to add more, to hurry warmth into being, but he let it pass. The fire responded with a quiet acceptance, brightening without flaring. The house noticed. Sarah stirred and sat up, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair fell loose for a moment before she tied it back. Her movements unhurried. She watched the hearth with a small nod, approval expressed not in words but in the absence of correction. Margaret opened her eyes. She did not rise. She did not need to. Her breath deepened, a subtle sign that the morning had arrived safely. Lily slept on, her small body curled into warmth that did not yet need replenishing. Bear lifted his head briefly, then set it down again, satisfied. Moth emerged from her pocket near the wall and padded toward the hearth, stopping just shy of the growing heat. The fire woke fully, still modest, still obedient. The embers became flame. The flame became glow. The glow spread into stone and wood and earth. There was no sudden rush of warmth. The house did not require it. Nathan exhaled, a breath he had not realized he was holding. It lived, he said quietly. Samuel smiled, just a little. It always does, if we let it. Elias stepped closer. "You didn't rush it," he said. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. Nathan nodded. "I almost did." "Almost is fine," Elias replied. "Stopping is what matters." As the house woke, the morning tasks resumed. Not as a scramble, not as relief, but as sequence. Blankets were folded and aired. Straw layers were shaken gently and returned. Tools were warmed near the hearth, never on it. The door remained closed until the interior temperature had stabilized, until the walls had accepted the fire's contribution and returned it evenly. When the door finally opened, it did so with intention. Cold entered briefly, sharp and clean, and was absorbed without consequence. Outside, the land was still locked in winter's grip. The storm had left behind sculpted drifts and a silence that rang in the ears. Trees stood brittle. Snow glittered like ground glass. It was beautiful in a way that offered no mercy. Nathan stepped out with Elias and Samuel to check the entrance and clear what the wind had left behind. His breath fogged, but his hands did not shake. He moved with awareness now, of how long to stay, of how quickly to return, of what mattered more than pride. When they came back inside, the warmth met them halfway. "This is the difference," Nathan said, rubbing his hands slowly. "Back home, mornings felt like luck, like you woke up and hoped things worked." Elias set down his gloves. "Luck is what you call preparation you don't understand." Nathan smiled at that, not because it was clever, but because it was true. They ate quietly, steam rising from cups, the fire holding steady. The house did not celebrate survival. It assumed it because it had been earned. Later, as the light outside shifted, never brightening, only changing tone, Nathan found himself standing near the hearth again, watching the flames travel along the trough in a slow, even line. He thought of all the mornings he had known near where heat had been forced into being, where fuel had been burned in panic, where exhaustion had followed immediately after waking. Here, the morning was not a gift. It was a result. He looked at Samuel, who was tying off a cord he had repaired the night before. Fingers sure and patient. He looked at Sarah, guiding Lily through folding without flattening the air from the wool. He looked at Margaret, eyes closed again, resting not because she was tired, but because her work had already been done. Nathan realized that this morning, this ordinary, unremarkable morning, was the reward the house offered when every rule had been followed. No miracles, no drama, just continuity. Before midday, he found himself back at the hearth with Samuel, adding fuel with the same care he had shown at dawn. The fire accepted it. The house held. Nathan felt a quiet pride. Not the loud kind that demanded recognition, but the kind that settled into the body and stayed. Morning had come, and it had been made. Spring did not announce itself with warmth. It arrived first as change. The air outside shifted, almost imperceptibly, losing its knife-edge sharpness. Snow still covered the land, but it no longer hissed when the wind passed over it. The light, when it came, lingered a little longer each day. Not brighter, just more patient. Inside the earth house, these changes were felt not as relief, but as confirmation. The system that had carried them through winter continued to work, even as the reason for it slowly faded. The house did not loosen its discipline. Blankets were still layered with care. The fire was still kept long and modest. The door was still treated with respect. No one assumed safety simply because winter was retreating. Survival had taught them better than that. Nathan noticed the difference in Lily before he noticed it in the weather. She laughed now, quietly at first, then more freely. Not because the cold had gone, but because it no longer frightened her. Her body had learned the rhythms of the house so completely that fear had lost its footing. She ran small errands without being asked, carried wool to be aired, returned tools to their places. Her cheeks stayed warm even near the entrance, and her sleep was deep and easy. One morning, as the house prepared for the day, Lily looked up at Nathan and smiled. Not the cautious smile of a child seeking reassurance, but the open smile of someone who felt safe. "I like mornings now," she said. Nathan nodded, unable to find words immediately. He remembered how she had arrived. Quiet, watchful, clinging to warmth as if it might vanish at any moment. Now she moved through the space, as if it belonged to her, because it did. Samuel had changed too. The boy who once watched and copied now anticipated. He checked the hearth before being asked. He adjusted bedding without instruction. When Ben's hands began to tremble with age, Samuel took over the rope work naturally, his movements sure and measured. He no longer rushed to prove strength. He worked to preserve continuity. One evening, Elias watched Samuel align fuel along the hearth and said nothing. That silence was recognition. Sarah stood taller these days, not because winter had eased, but because its grip had loosened from her shoulders. The sharp vigilance that had once defined her softened into something steadier. She still corrected mistakes. She still enforced routines. But she smiled more. And when she did, it reached her eyes. Margaret spent more time resting now. Not from weakness, but from trust. She watched the younger ones move through the house and saw herself in fragments, in hands that remembered, in bodies that respected rhythm. Her work had not been wasted. Even the animals sensed the shift. Bear spent more time near the entrance, content to watch the changing world outside. Moth explored farther from the hearth, returning only when she wished, not because she needed to. The house no longer felt like a refuge clinging to survival. It felt like a place that belonged. One afternoon, when the snow outside softened enough to accept footprints instead of resisting them, Nathan stood near the door longer than usual. He did not open it. He listened. The house was quiet. Not tense. Not alert. Just present. He realized then that he had stopped counting days. Stopped measuring his time here as temporary. Elias noticed. "You're thinking," he said. Nathan smiled faintly. "I was supposed to leave when winter broke." "And?" Elias asked. Nathan looked around the house. The walls that remembered heat. The fire that obeyed discipline. The people who moved together without instruction. He thought of the life he had planned to return to. Straight walls. Loud heat. Private exhaustion. "I don't think I was ever passing through," he said. Elias nodded once. "Then stay." There was no ceremony, no announcement. Decisions here did not require witnesses. They required commitment. That evening, Abigail told one final story. Not of loss, but of return. Of people who left places like this and came back changed. Or not at all. She did not frame it as warning. She framed it as continuity. The house stays, she said, because people stay with it. Spring crept closer. Snow retreated from the edges of the land. The wind lost its cruelty. The earth house did not emerge dramatically from the ground. It simply remained, as it always had. Low, curved, patient. On the first day, the door was left open, longer than a breath. Nothing rushed in. No cold attacked. No system faltered. The house accepted the change without abandoning itself. Nathan stood beside Samuel, watching Lily chase a patch of light near the entrance, laughing openly now. Samuel smiled, not as a boy, but as someone who understood responsibility. "She'll remember this," Samuel said. Nathan nodded. "So will I." The fire burned as it always had. Not proud, not wasteful. The walls held their memory. The people moved in rhythm. Winter had passed. No one had been left behind, and the house remained. Not as shelter alone, but as community. This story is not really about winter or cold or an earth house hidden beneath snow. It is about how people survive when conditions are harsh, uncertain, and unforgiving. The house did not save anyone by itself. Fire alone did not save them. Strength alone did not save them. What carried them through was rhythm, discipline, shared responsibility, and the quiet decision to care for one another every single day. In our daily lives, we also face seasons that feel cold and overwhelming. Pressure at work, worry about money, loneliness, fatigue, moments when it feels like we must endure alone. This story reminds us that survival does not always mean fighting harder. Sometimes it means slowing down, building better systems, and allowing others to stand close when we need warmth. It means preparing before the crisis arrives, respecting simple routines, and trusting that small, consistent actions matter more than dramatic effort. You may not live in the cold north, you may not sleep in an earth house, but you can apply the same lessons today. Create rhythms that protect your energy. Rest before you are exhausted. Share burdens instead of carrying them alone. Build habits that store strength for tomorrow. Be a source of warmth for someone else, even quietly, even without recognition. After listening to this story, take a moment to reflect. What part of your life needs better rhythm instead of more force? Who around you could use shared warmth rather than advice? What small discipline today could protect you tomorrow? If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who may need comfort or perspective. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are listening from, or what part of the story stayed with you. If you found peace or meaning here, consider subscribing to the channel so you can return whenever you need rest, reflection, or calm. May God bless you, protect you, and give you strength through every season you face. If you agree with the spirit of this story and wish peace for yourself and others, you are welcome to comment Amen below. Thank you for being here.